A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
The apostles gathered together with Jesus and reported all they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." People were coming and going in great numbers, and they had no opportunity even to eat. So they went off in the boat by themselves to a deserted place. People saw them leaving, and many came to know about it. They hastened there on foot from all the towns and arrived at the place before them. When he disembarked and saw the vast crowds, his heart was moved with pity for them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. One of my favorite summer breaks is to spend a week in Crested Butte, Colorado. I love that place. I've been going there for almost 35 years, and I especially enjoy taking one day each summer to climb to the top of Mount Crested Butte. It's only about 12,500 feet, but it gives a great view. And I like to take people with me so that they can get a sense of that perspective. And it's a very unique perspective because from the top of that peak, you can see everything around you. From the Continental Divide to the east, to the historic mining town just beneath your feet, and it looks like a postage stamp from that elevation. The river valleys, the forests, etc. It's an irrepeatable perspective, irreplaceable perspective on a person's reality and setting. And so giving people that opportunity to have that perspective is really one of the highlights of that summer trip. Every now and then, it's important for us to take time away and to put things in perspective as well. To know where we are in our faith lives, not just our physical and geographical lives. And that's why in today's gospel, Jesus says to the disciples, "Come away with me to a quiet place and rest." Jesus is asking the disciples to spend time with him so he can help them put things in perspective, especially from his point of view. The disciples and Jesus surely had a lot to talk about, and so do we. Think about the disciples for a minute. They had just returned from their first real experience of mission. We heard that in last week's gospel reading when Jesus sent them out to proclaim the gospel. And they undoubtedly had stories to tell from every town they visited. Some were probably stories of success. Others undoubtedly were stories of failure. I'm sure there were times when they gave comfort to the sick and other times when they themselves were afflicted with distress. Some experiences probably brought them great joy, while others probably left them somewhat sad. Thinking back to last week's gospel and the instructions Jesus gave the disciples, I'm sure there are times when they did not want to be responsible for carrying that walking staff, or times when they wish they had brought that second tunic or that money bag. They had a lot of experiences to discuss, to understand, and they needed the Lord's help to do that. And so Jesus says to them, Come away with me and rest. Now, when Jesus invites the disciples to rest, he's being very specific on what he is wanting them to experience. You see, when we hear that term, come away with me and rest, we think that Jesus is inviting them to take a nap. But he's not inviting them to go to sleep. Something very different. He is inviting them to experience that same gift of rest that God himself experienced on the seventh day of creation in the book of Genesis, when we were told that God rested from all the work he had done. Now we need to ask the question, why did God need to rest? Did it exhaust the Lord to create heaven and earth? No, of course not. God rested, not because the Lord was exhausted, but because the Lord wanted to show us how important it is to make time, to spend time in contemplative appreciation and reflection of the works of our lives. You see, God took time on the seventh day to look back at everything he had created and to appreciate it, to contemplate it. That's the kind of rest that Jesus is inviting the disciples to, and that's the kind of rest that he invites us to. A rest that looks back on our weekly efforts with a sense of wonder, a sense of satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of gratitude for having participated in the mission of the gospel. It is a rest that prayerfully contemplates the meaning of what we have done and how God has accomplished his work in the world through us every day. If we don't have that kind of perspective, if we're not entering into that kind of rest where Jesus can reveal to us the meaning of our daily efforts, then we become distracted. We lose focus, and at a certain point, we lose purpose. And we become like sheep without a shepherd. The disciples had a lot to reflect on. Why did they experience rejection from some towns, but acceptance from other towns? Was it the message they proclaimed, or was it how they proclaimed it? What did they do right? What did they do wrong? We all need a place where we can rest and ask those same questions of our lives as well. And not just of ourselves by ourselves, but to prayerfully discuss those questions with God and allow the Lord to help us put them in perspective, to give us that contemplative appreciation of our lives. It's one thing to discuss the events of our lives and movements of our hearts with someone else, but it's another thing to bring those experiences to prayer and spend time with the Lord, sorting them out. Now, I think about Father Freitag during this month. He's spending 30 days in silence and prayer, conducting the Ignatian exercises of the spiritual exercises of his retreat. This is a very graced opportunity. It's really a very privileged opportunity for a priest to be able to take 30 days in silence and prayer with God. These are days when he will be entering into, or is entering into, this kind of rest with the Lord that is based upon an appreciative contemplation of the movement of God in his life. It's when he will be able to recognize the times when he has listened to the voice of God directing him and responded to it, as opposed to the times of pursuing his own will. And we all need that experience as well. You know, in the church's wisdom, the church considers it so important for deacons and priests and even bishops to spend time with the Lord in that restful experience of retreat, that it is required of us by law that every year we spend an entire week experiencing that quiet, contemplative rest with Jesus, so that we can gain perspective on our ministry. We can become grounded once again in the Lord. We can keep our priorities based on Jesus' priorities. 1 week a year, we are required to go away and spend that week with Jesus. It's that important. And even before we are ordained, whether it's a deacon, a priest, or a bishop, before anyone is ordained, the church requires that they go and spend 1 week with Jesus so that they can be focused in their new ministry. They can be open to the graces and the challenge and the office being entrusted to them. They can be responsive to the graces that will be offered to them. Before I was ordained a bishop last May, I had to conduct my retreat. And so I decided to go to Wichita for a week. I went there because in Wichita, there's no chance for distraction or temptation. If you're from Wichita, I apologize. But it was an incredibly graced experience of spending hours a day in silent prayer with the Lord and letting Jesus basically open my heart and mind so that I could begin a new chapter in life and ministry, very much conformed to the mind of Christ. Think about that for us for a minute. Even though the church doesn't require that we spend a week a year going away and experiencing this rest with Jesus, think about what a blessed experience it could be in your life to make time to spend time with Jesus. When you think about it, we're kind of like the disciples in today's reading, really. Each week we come to Mass with a variety of experiences. Some are positive, I'm sure some are negative. Some will make us thankful, some probably upset us, and hopefully some will make us laugh. Some may just leave us wondering, what's going on in my life? What does all this mean? And every week, Jesus says to us, as he said to his disciples, come away, rest with me for a while. Let's talk about your life, and I will give you perspective. Where do you go for that encounter? On a daily or weekly basis, where do you go to make time to spend time in quiet reflection with the Lord? Maybe it's in quiet prayer before Mass. Maybe you choose to turn off the radio in the car and spend some moments with the Lord even during your daily commute. Maybe it's getting up earlier in the morning to have a moment of quiet prayer with Jesus, or taking 10 minutes during your lunch break to reflect on your day. Maybe it's even taking 1 hour out of your week to spend in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament in your Adoration Chapel. You are so blessed to have access to the Blessed Sacrament 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In that second letter to the Ephesians, Paul told us something very important and very challenging. He said, Jesus has given us access to the Father. You know what the question for us is, though? Are we using that access? Are we choosing to make time to spend time with Jesus, who makes himself available to us and who wants to help us keep our life in perspective, keep our priorities correct, and keep us in communion with him throughout